Emily is a lead UX designer with over 10 years of design and development experience. Currently, she works for LC Vista, and she is also director here for Women Who Code Cincinnati. Beyond her professional life, she enjoys gaming, hiking, and photography. And tonight, she'll be talking about discovering UX and understanding the difference between UX and UI, the different roles within UX, and what the average week looks like for a UX designer.
All right. So I'll get into it. So hey, today I'm going to be speaking about the UX design field, and I'm going to go over some fundamentals, what the different roles look like, and what an average week will look like. So I wanted to do a quick talk full of advice and questions I get asked by junior designers and people trying to break into the field. So again, I'll just go over it. I'm Emily. I'm a director here for the Cincinnati chapter of Women Who Code, and I'm also a lead UX designer. I've been doing this designing and developing for 11 years, and I love photography, PC gaming, and hiking. Very excited about Diablo 4, so if you want to play with me, let me know after this and I'll give you my tag. So what I will cover today is really 3 different things. So what is UX? UX design, UI design, usability. What do all these words mean and what is the connection? And next, the roles within UX. So all of the different roles and hybrid roles within the UX umbrella. And then what it looks like. So an average week will vary, but I wanted to give an overview of what like a typical 2 weeks would look like. So let's define what UX is at the core. The user experience is the interaction between users and a company, services, and its product. The manner in which users experience a product is similar to how we perceive our environment and the items within it. It's not just how well a product works, but how they expect things to work and how they feel while using it. Some factors that influence this are the value, desirability, accessibility, credibility, and of course, usability. So if the user experience is the entire pie, then usability is just one piece of that pie. And that refers to how effective the user can use a product and accomplish tasks. You can test this with user studies to see how well they can learn and use your product to determine whether or not it suits their needs. Now that we know what UX is, what experiences are we talking about specifically? Anything. It could be a button click, getting frustrated while waiting for a page to load, or using a date picker. It could also be something physical, like pushing buttons on a TV remote or using a microwave. The goal is to create products that are accessible, practical, useful, and easy to use. This requires introducing UX processes that allow you to research and empathize with the people you're serving. And I'll demonstrate this by doing a quick, fun discovery phase with you. This is Boxcar. He doesn't know anything about UX design, but he also hates that cat door. After observing him via field research, I noticed that the door closes too quickly behind him, and it ends up catching his tail or back paw, which of course he doesn't like. I think if Boxcar could talk, he would comment on the poor usability of the cat door and provide some helpful feedback. So part of discovery is understanding the user and the problem. Who is the user here? I think the company would say that the only users are pet owners, but who is technically using the door? The cat, right? While building this product, do you think they did any research and testing with cats? I have my doubts. So for fun, let's try to define a user need statement and any pain points. So Boxcar is a middle-aged indoor cat living in the Midwest. He is left alone during the day. He shares a space with a rather annoying French bulldog. He has the basic needs of all cats and lives in a multi-level home. From there, we can then define a user need. User is a middle-aged cat who needs access to a litter box, food, and water without any assistance. That would be me. A pain point would be that the door crushes his tail or back paw when he uses it. So after doing this research and understanding the problem, we can then feel for Boxcar. And that's the most important part of UX is the user. Advocating for the user and developing empathy for their needs is at the core of what we do. Now we'll pivot and go into the difference between UX and UI. In short, UX is the study of problems at the crossroads of design, people, and tech. And the UI is one part of that, the visual portion. And this is an important distinction because a common idea is that all UX design is fonts and colors, when in reality, the UI is only a portion of what UX designers do. And some UX professionals don't even touch the UI. Which roles? Well, let's review the roles within UX. The first role, and the most common, is the UX designer. Smaller companies don't really have the resource to have specialists at this point, so you'll find UX designers here. And the UX designer handles every part of the design process, but this can often mean that you don't devote enough time in each step of the process. If you like doing different things, this is a good role for you. You can think of UX designers as full stack developers who are expected to work on every layer of the stack. Larger companies can have UX designers and researchers, and these researchers are comfortable collecting both qualitative and quantitative data through a variety of techniques. So these daily tasks can include doing user interviews, usability testing, competitive research, and user observations. They work with the designers to get them the results they need to create a more effective design. So the UX engineer. Now, this is the position that I've done for most of my career, mainly because I've worked for a lot of startups, and there are far less front-end developers than full-stack developers, and no one really wanted to tackle design. And I took that personally because I really care about it. I grew to really appreciate both design and development, and now it makes my job as a designer so much easier because I understand how everything works together. Sometimes you work within a design team and sometimes you report to engineering. It totally depends on the company structure and team size. And UX engineers are also called design technologists or creative technologists. Next is the UI designer, which you don't find a lot of unless it's a very large company. I would say the UX designer position has largely consumed this role. Lastly, there are UX writers who focus on content and QA who only make sure that designs are being followed up by development. If you're wondering what role to get into, that's completely up to you and it depends on what you like doing. I would say that the UX designer is the most common role and most sought after position. UX engineers are highly valued, but there aren't a lot of postings because it's not as common. There aren't a lot of people who can do both design and development work. So what do I do? My company is a smaller company that focuses on compliance, training, and other management tasks for accounting firms. It's fully agile, and we do agile pods, which have different goals. My pod solely focuses on new feature development. So now you know where I work and what I work on, but what do I do in a typical week? So in general, I have about 3 different categories of work I do on a regular basis. The first is, of course, meetings. As with any job these days, a large portion of what you do is participate in meetings. They're all about processes, planning, and working together to solve problems. I have Scrum meetings with my dev pod, meetings with the product team, design review meetings with other designers, and project-related meetings with other product owners. I also lead design thinking workshops and brainstorming sessions. One second. Got a cough. Okay. The other big part of my job is research. So the type of research I do depends largely on where we are in the life cycle of a project. Depending on the type of research needed, it could be research I do on my own or with stakeholders. It could be with users one-on-one, like with interviews, or in a larger user study. Recently, I was tasked with providing ways that we could improve the workflow on a feature, but doing so incrementally. This will require me to review past user feedback that we've done in user studies, and then also reviewing past design thinking session notes. Research also includes interviews, usability testing, and observations, which technically are meetings, but they always have action items. Lastly, deliverables. And this is really the outcome from the previous research. This is where the designs and prototypes come in. For a new project, it might be a low fidelity wireframe, or it could be a full report containing usability test findings from a previous study. Within the last couple of months, I finished creating a design system, and more recently, a second iteration of wireframes for a project. But before I end this, I wanted to touch on what you're not taught in boot camps or in school. And that is, reality is different. What you're taught may be different from what you face in your first position. So the design process, you're taught the importance of a good design process, but depending on the project, you may not have the time to do everything on that list. It really depends on the company and the level of UX maturity at that company. And of course, the type of project you're working on. The business, so you speak for the user, but you serve the business. So sometimes those two items conflict with one another, and you'll have to try to convince stakeholders or compromise and meet somewhere in the middle. Relationships. This job is all about maintaining and building great internal relationships. If you are not well liked, people will not listen to you. Once I was in a weird position because a senior level designer wasn't well liked, and people stopped bringing issues to him, and instead they all came to me, which isn't what you want. In order to be successful, and in order for product owners, engineers to listen to you and build the designs you create, you have to be nice and easy to work with. There is a delicate line with compromising in UX. If it's important, it's up to you to convince people why it needs to happen. You cannot expect people to do everything you say because you are the UX person. That's not how things work. Next is no research. Sometimes you might not get to do regular research. I've been in companies that didn't value user observation field work, so you might have to fight for this. And yes, you will have to advocate for yourself in order to do common UX tasks. Code first. Sometimes developers will start projects before you've even seen it. There will be occasions where your designs might be limited by pre-existing code, and it's up to you to work around those limitations. The last one is that it can be difficult to break into this industry. And I know that some boot camps try to sell how easy it is to land a UX job and to make a six-figure salary, but that is not the case. It can really be a challenge to break into this field, and there's really, unfortunately, no way to sugarcoat that. Hiring in tech right now is brutal, even for senior level people. But if this is something you really want to do, I don't give up if it's something you're really passionate about. Eventually, someone will say yes, but it may take a ton of no's to get there. So now I'll open it up for any questions that you might have.
Thank you. That was awesome. I know you said you were nervous beforehand, but it was a really, really great presentation.
Yay, I'm glad you like it.
My personal question was like, what steps should an engineer take if they're looking to transition from an engineering role into somewhere in the UX sphere? And how would you recommend like figuring out which role would be right for you?
That is an excellent question, and also a rather complicated one. So with me, when I worked at a startup, I find that in startups and very small companies, you're really allowed to wear many hats. And if you want to take something on, you can tell your manager that you're interested in learning more about this, and you want to maybe try design, maybe you want to do maybe a little bit on the front end side. Just ask, and usually if you're interested, they will make it happen.
As you're working on design, at which stage, if any, do you incorporate privacy policy or privacy by design?
I would say that is a good question too. I always try to, I don't work with privacy policies specifically. We normally kind of have like a cookie cutter kind of privacy policy that's included in like the logging in and the registration portion. There's usually like a terms of service and privacy policy. So it's easily accessible. I know it's always in like marketing sites as well, so that when you're registering as a new user, you're agreeing to these steps and you have to usually scroll all the way to the bottom to acknowledge it and then go through to sign up.
So actually, so under GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, there are all these rights that you have to provide to consumers and your customers. So it sounds like there's a lot of companies, I know like the numbers are only 20% of companies are privacy compliant. It sounds like then a lot of companies are not even anywhere near what they're supposed to be doing yet.
Probably not. I won't speak for my company because I can't.
I'm not asking you to, but just based on general, I don't even want you to, but just based on like general industry experience that you have.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, usually HR is in there, but unless the company is like a larger company, there won't be any like accountants or legal people within it at that point. I've worked for really small companies though. So I think the largest company I worked for had like maybe 5,000 employees, but yeah.
Well, because everybody's telling me that I'm the first one to do what I actually do. So it's interesting to hear from somebody on your guys' end that that's probably the case.
Probably.
Nice. That's good and bad.
Yes.
All right, thanks, Emily. All right, you did awesome, by the way.
Thank you. I practiced.
You can tell it was awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. I don't know what you're nervous about. That was great.
Well, I'm always nervous about something, but I'm just an anxious person, I guess. Does anybody have any other questions? If not, I guess we could pivot to the next person.
Okay.
Maybe I did such a good job. There were no questions.
By the way, I just wanted to say, coming in as a new person to all of this, I found what your presentation be really fascinating. I really think if I was starting out, I would be headed towards UX. That was great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm thinking about doing a larger talk, getting into some of the research and studies. I feel like not enough people talk about that, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. I think we're good, and we can move on to Sandi's. Although Emily will still be here, so if you have any last minute pressing questions, feel free to ask those in the chat, and she can answer them there too. I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Sandi Ritter. Sandi has over 20 years of experience in software development, working on projects ranging from mainframe to mobile development. She is currently employed at P&G, where she is the iOS tech lead for an oral care mobile app team. In her spare time, she's also a director for Women Who Code Cincinnati, and we love having her, and enjoys playing the drums, challenging herself physically at the gym and visiting thrift stores. Sandi, take it away.
All righty. So my original intent for this talk was to talk strictly about custom rules in SwiftLint, but that quickly morphed as I was planning this out. It seemed to be really difficult to jump right into custom rules without laying some foundational Swift knowledge. So this is going to be a little more general, and we're going to talk about customizing SwiftLint in general, which will also include adding custom rules. All right, but first I want to start with this quote. You might ask yourself, like, why use SwiftLint or any other linting tool? And I think this quote kind of boils it down to like the heart of the matter. Quality is not something you add like salt at the end. It must be baked in. And I would ask all of you, is quality important to your team or your project? I'm going to guess that it is. But we all know what happens when you're working against tight deadlines. You have so many things to do that sometimes you feel like you have to cut corners somewhere. and often that leads to the quality sliding down. However, if you use tools like SwiftLint, that helps you build quality into your process so that it isn't always an afterthought. It makes things a little easier to move forward. So what is SwiftLint? It's a linting tool used for iOS Swift projects, and many languages have their own versions of linting tools. I think Android has Android Lint, there's JS Lint, there's ES Lint. There's probably one for pretty much all modern languages. And the term lint itself is a computer science term for a static code analysis tool that is used to flag programming errors, bugs, stylistic errors, and suspicious constructs. The term originates from a Unix utility that examines C language source code. Therefore, any program that performs this function is commonly known as a linter. And the overall goal of any linter is to aid in maintaining code quality and ensure consistency across the code base. So let's talk a little bit more about SwiftLint. SwiftLint is based on rule sets. That's how it works under the covers. And as a result, it's a pretty flexible tool. Out of the box, it has a very large set of default rules that are automatically applied to your code, even if no configuration at all is added. But in addition to the default rules, there is also a large set of rules that you can opt into if you feel like they'd be useful to your code base. And then if you can't find a default rule or an opt-in rule that meets your needs, you can always write your own rules. So when we think about customizing SwiftLint, like where would we start? And the first place to start, in my opinion, is always the default rules. You can review the default rule set and see which rules seem to apply to your code base. In general, the default rule set enforces the rules that are generally accepted by the Swift community. And they are used by a very popular Swift style guide from Codeco. So a lot of the default rules are rules that most projects want to enforce. But there's also a really large set of opt-in rules. The opt-in rules aren't quite as useful as the default rules. Sometimes they're slower, sometimes they can provide false positives, and sometimes they might only be useful in very certain circumstances. So that's why it's a little more beneficial to like dig in a little deeper on the opt-in rules before you apply it. And then of course, the very last option would be to write your own rules. And even that can be a fairly easy process. So when we talk about writing a custom rule in SwiftLint, there's basically two types you can have. The first type, which is an actual like true Swift custom rule, they're written the same way as the Swift-based rules that come out of the box with SwiftLint. They're fast, they're accurate, they use Swift syntax, and they could be unit tested. That's why they're a default rule. They're like really solid. So if you mimic that process, you will have a really solid custom rule. However, it involves the usage of Bazel, which is a free open source software tool that's used for automating building and testing software. And because this is a little more cumbersome, it takes a little bit more work, this sort of custom rule is out of the scope of this talk. But the second type of custom rule is very easy to implement, and it leverages regular expressions. And that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight when we talk about custom rules. So what's the best way to learn about customizing SwiftLint? I think it's to dive right into a code base and do it together. So let's move to my editor and we will get this show on the road. So this is just a small code base that generates a clock, and what it actually generates is less of what we're going to focus on than the actual code itself. And honestly, the first step to SwiftLint would be to install it, which I've already done. And I also have it set up to run on build. I feel like that for me is the best process. So I already have that done under the covers. So, excuse me, because I have it installed, we should be able to run a build and see what it does. But before we do that, I just want to show you my, my configuration file. And this is it. It's SwiftLint.yaml. It is absolutely 100% empty. I have no configuration set up for this yet. So let's just build it and see what the heck happens. So what this did was it applied every default rule that SwiftLint has directly out of the box. And you can see that my little code base here has some errors. We have 6 errors and we have 11 warnings. You can, SwiftLint can be set up to apply a rule as an error or a warning, depending on how severe you think it is. Because a warning you can let slide, but an error, obviously you can't. So what I want to do is kind of bump through these one by one and see how we would handle them in a real world scenario. And for me, I always start on the errors first because they just feel more urgent. So we have 6, but they're all the very same thing. And this particular error, it is an error on my variable name. And it's because I have my variable name set to X here and Y here, single digit. Out of the box, the default identifier name rule wants the name to be between 3 and 40 characters. And it's flagged as an error. Generally, I would agree with this, but for 2 reasons. 1, the sake of this demonstration, and 2, because this code is actually using X and Y axes to draw the clock, I am going to leave these as they are and accept that. So what that means is I have to change something in my configuration file so that that rule is not applied. So let's hop back to my configuration file. And here is how we're going to customize that to ignore that. So this is what we're going to add. This is the name of the rule, which you can see matches the name over here. Whoops, if I look at the right line, identifier name. So I add that to my SwiftLint file. And for that rule, I'm going to exclude X and Y. So that means anytime we run that rule and it finds X and Y, it's just going to pretend like it doesn't even see them. Run a build, boom, they're all gone. So we've accepted that we want to allow for that. So once I'm done with all my errors, then I just start bumping through my warnings. And this particular warning is about redundant optional initialization. So in Swift, we have things called optionals. And generally speaking, if it's an optional, it is nil if it doesn't exist. We don't have to do this sort of thing. So this is what it's flagging for us. We do not have to say, if this doesn't exist, set it to nil. Like that's redundant, it already happens. So I'm going to change my code to comply with that. And then we'll run a build, boom, it's all gone. And most of these will be fairly simple and straightforward, but you'll just see the code looks so much better and feels better as you fix them up and make sure that it all looks the way you want it to. This one doesn't like where my opening brace is because it's down here. It wants it up here with one space. So I like that. It makes the code look clear and concise. So we're going to follow that rule. And you can see that gets rid of that error because my code complies. This next one is for a to-do. So out of the box, the SwiftLint rule is you should not leave to-dos in your code. However, I think to-dos in your code can be useful in certain situations. So we are going to change our configuration file so that it does not produce an error for us, or a warning, sorry. So let's go back to our configuration file, and I'm going to add it at the top. And all you do is add a section for disabled rules, and you give it the rule name, and it will disable that rule. And you'll see the rule name here, to do, matches the rule over here. So we've disabled it. I should be able to build again, and it's gone. I can now leave my to-dos in my code. And our next one is centered once again around variable names. This one is a warning, not an error. See, but it is also pointing out the fact that my name should be between 3 and 40. Once again, for the sake of the demo, and because we are actually graphing things out on X and Y axes, we are going to accept this one as well. So let's go update our file to do just that. And it's going to be a similar process. Now that I have a section in my configuration to disable, I can just add to that. Let's make the line up and look really pretty. There we go. So now I'm going to disable that rule, build, life is grand, they all go away. Then we have a couple little minor things. These are minor, but they really make the code more readable. This one is a comma spacing violation, and it just is so much better if everybody puts a space after their comma. Like, I love enforcing that one so much. And then we have some white space violations. Some people will leave random tabs and spaces in their code. No, thank you. And then it also, I actually did 2 there. So if I save that, I got rid of those random spaces, but then I also have a vertical white space error because we only want one vertical white space between our code. So we change that and we build. We've implemented the default rule set. Our code is great. We've disabled a couple. But let's look real quick at the opt-in rules because that was just the default rule set. So let's look at how we would customize and use some opt-in rules. So I'm going to have a little set of opt-in rules that I'm going to apply here. And then we'll build. And it will generate many more errors. And we'll just bump through and I'll just show you the changes real quick. Like this one is kind of anal. Like it wants the imports to be in alphabetic order. And I'm like, thank you very much. I love alphabetic order. So we are going to fix that one. And then once again, we got the vertical white space. We don't like the extra vertical white space. So we're going to get rid of that one. And this one's interesting because it makes your code, format your code in a specific way. It's around the multi-line literal brackets. It likes this much better, having it there, but we must line things up. So let's line things up and make them beautiful. And that looks so much nicer when you can actually read your list and it's all split out that way. And then we have something similar down here. It doesn't like the organization of my vertical parameters. So let's see here. There we go. Now you can see the parameters are all lined up in vertical order, much more readable and just generally speaking, pretty. Oh, and here's one that I catch myself violating all the time, although I really like to enforce it, is putting a space between operators. Like technically what I had before was not wrong, and kind of mathematically, I like to jam my stuff together, but I think we can all agree that this is much more readable, especially for somebody who maybe isn't so much into math and just like really wants to understand what's going on with the code. So although I'm an offender, I do like to enforce that one. And this one's just our white space again, and more alignment here of our arguments names, just to get everything nice and pretty. And I always want to make sure it's lined up. So now we should have, we've opted into some default rules, implemented them, and in general, our code looks just a lot better. But let's talk about a custom rule. And for custom rule, I want to go back to one of the first things we looked at, which was the warning for leaving a to-do in the code, which I think leaving to-dos in the code are very valuable. However, I don't think they're valuable when you leave them like this. I don't know what, like tomorrow, I'm going to be like, I don't know, did I do this? Am I supposed to do this? Who's doing this? When is it going to be done? Like this is just a random comment that really is meaningless. So what I like to do is implement a rule that requires a JIRA ticket to be aligned with the comment. I chose JIRA simply because that's what we use at work. So this way, if you leave it to do in the code, you must have a corresponding JIRA ticket in the comment so that we know there's some sort of tracking going on. And this won't just be a comment that, 3 months from now, we're all like, what does this mean? So I've already written the custom rule just for sake of time. So we'll drop it in here and we'll talk about it really quick. The way to implement a custom rule is just to add a custom rules section to your configuration, super easy. And this is what we're going to call the rule. Naming's not a strong suit of mine, so that's what we're calling it. And the included, that just is a way for you to tell SwiftLint what files you want to include. So I'm going to include any file with .swift with this rule. You might want to write a rule that only applies to, that doesn't apply to your test, but just to your code, like that sort of thing. This gives you that sort of flexibility. And because it's custom, you can name it whatever you want. And the heart of it right here is the regular expression that you're going to imply. regular expressions, if you've never worked with them, they're a talk all by themselves. So I'm not going to like dive too deep into how we did this because that might take some time. But at a high level, this regular expression, it is looking for to do specifically, followed by HTTPS : the word Jira. And then this would be the corresponding project in Jira. So this is assuming my project is called ABCD in Jira. So this regular expression is going to try to find that, and it's going to match on a comment. So it's only going to look in a comment to meet this particular expression. And if it finds this in error, then this is the message it will produce in the code base so that I know what to do. And the severity, I chose to make it a warning. You could also choose to make it an error so that it can't be bypassed. So let's go build and see what it does when we apply that. Oh, this is perfect. This is live coding at its best here. What did I do wrong in my configuration file? All right, hold on. Oh, please. This is where I need background music. Okay. Let's try again. There we go. Oh, okay. So I have 2 to-dos in here. I've got 2 flagged warnings, and that produces exactly what I have there. So let's find my fake Jira number, which here we go. Sorry. So if I would add a Jira number in here, I should build and it should work. Looking for that Jira ticket. So let's go look. We'll do the same thing over here, but we'll do a little test just to make sure that my regular expression is working as it should. So I'll take the S out of HTTPS, and that fails because I'm 100% expecting it to do a match on that. Also, if the word Jira is not an exact match, it will get a fail there. And then if you flub up the project number here, you will also get an error there. But if it's all aligned as you expect, it will be beautiful and work. You could make that rule more complex. I just picked out a few things that to me indicated that there was probably a correct Jira ticket number in here. You probably, if you have those 3 things, odds are good you went into Jira, copied it out, and pasted it into your code. And that's really the intent of that as well. So that really quickly is using SwiftLint and customizing it to meet your needs. I mentioned a bunch of these things as I was talking. Listed here as resources that you can go look at the end. The GitHub for SwiftLint, the rule directory, which, this sounds nerdy, but it's kind of fascinating when you go out and see like literally all the rules that there are that you can apply to your code. And then this is the Codeco's Swift style guide, which a lot of people reference. And then there's some references to Bazel and Swift syntax, in case anybody's curious. So that is it. Thank you for listening. 2 best ways to find me are on the Woman Who Codes Slack, just Sandi, or you can email me at that email address. And that is all I got.
Good job, Sandi.
Thank you.
Awesome. An excellent presentation. Emily dropped a question in the chat, and if anyone else has questions, you can put them in the chat or ask them after this one. Is there an auto fix for common warnings like spaces and such? I remember some other linters fixing them automatically.
Yep, that is, you can set up SwiftLint to automatically fix the warnings for you. That's been a hot debate on my team. Like some people like it, some people don't, because it hides the fact that you're not quite complying with the style guide, which I get, but we all make mistakes here and there. So Yeah, but yeah, you can set it up so that when I could run it on build and it just like whoop, fixes all the warnings for me, and I don't have to do anything except commit those changes. Yeah,
nice.
It's pretty useful. I'm going to guess other linters do the same thing. It's been a long time since I've looked at other types.
Interesting. I've never had that debate.
We debate lots of things on my team.
Just do it. Let it do its thing. That was really cool. That is much easier than building out a custom Android lint rule. Like so much easier. Any other questions?
I just want to say, as a non-coder, you made that so easy.
Yeah.
I was able to follow you the whole way, Sandi. That was really interesting.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Then we'll move on to our final presentation for today, our last lightning talk with Alexx Mitchell. Let me find my window with bios. Alexx is a software engineer with 5 years of experience building user-friendly web and mobile application. She works at P&G and is a lead for Women Who Code Cincinnati. Outside of work, she enjoys hiking, running, and finding new EDM artists. And today she'll be talking about adding new technologies to your code base.
All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you all see the slides?
I see, Alexx. Okay, now I see your slides. It took a minute to load for me. Sorry.
Okay, all right. Well, hello everyone, and today I'll be speaking about adding a new technology to your code base. This is something that my team and I are working through, and you'll see like the where we started from, and I guess the things that we're going to add in the future to address our needs. So here is an agenda of the things that we'll be talking about. So let's get started. So about me, like Sierra said, I enjoy hiking, running, and going to music festivals to find different EDM artists. So I'm a bootcamp grad with 5 years of software development experience. I did a coding bootcamp with learning full stack JavaScript. In my first role, I was a front-end developer, and then after that, I transitioned into Android development. So with Android, I started using the traditional XML UI toolkit. And then my first official role with Android was a new project, brand new, using Jetpack Compose. And the project that I'm currently on is one that existed previously that uses XML. So, all right. So first I wanted to give a background on Jetpack Compose. This is part of what my team is adding into our existing project. So Jetpack Compose is a new way to build your UIs for Android. It became stable in 2020, and Google recommended it as a way for you to build your user interfaces. So it allows you to build UIs faster. You're able to use Kotlin all the time, so without having to use an additional layout file with XML as well. Animations are much simpler. Things that used to take a while to build and create are done with a breeze with simple, I guess, simple functions. However, Jetpack Compose does present a paradigm shift. So those experienced Android developers, as well as for new Android developers, if they didn't have like a background in declarative programming, it's something new for them. So here is just an example of the two differences. So on the left would be an imperative approach. This is a very basic text view that you could create. And here we're setting the text. Instead of setting it in the layout file, we're setting it in either a fragment or an activity. As well, there's some other boilerplate like constraint layout information. That's just based on the layout that it's placed in. However, when we look to the right for the declarative approach, we see that we're able to just like explicitly say our text. This would be wrapped in a type of layout composable. So either a column or a row or even a surface, something that holds it to sit into the screen. But you would be able to do this all in one file. You wouldn't need to have multiple files to make that happen. So that brings me to our team dilemma. So on our team, it's a fairly new team. So the project has existed for years, but on our team, only one person had been there for longer than 11 months. So we were all eager to use Jetpack Compose. However, there wasn't a pattern that existed within our code base. As we were building and going along, it became evident that there were different approaches in how we could add it to our code base. So here is the next session, getting back on track. And I'll go through the things that we're currently doing and what we're moving forward to in the future to get us more cohesive. So first things first, we decided to add in a team meeting for all of our Android developers. So I think our team may be different from other companies, whereas on our product, we have two different teams. So like say there's one part of the team that works on a certain section of the app and another part works on the other section. But within those two teams that work on a specific section, there is Android and iOS. So we don't interact on a day-to-day. And up until a certain point, we didn't have a team meet just between Android developers. So I decided to create a team meeting for us to address some of the issues that were coming up in our code base. So one of the things was to decide on a pattern. So of those different approaches that were in our code base, there were two key ones. And to the right, you can see just a little pros and cons list of both approaches that came up that I created for us to just have a quick reference on a slide. And part of this was just to get a consensus to get a consensus to make sure that we're all on the same page and like how we will approach structuring our code for the future. The other part of the meeting was to preview theming. So with Compose, theming makes it easier for you to build your screens, I guess, quicker without having so you're able to have support for light and dark theme already built into that theme, so you won't have to it just makes it simpler. I'll just say that. And then also for the other goal of the meeting was to share the next steps of how we would move forward. After we had decided on our pattern, there would be a time where we would have to go through and correct some of the issues or change over some of the screens that were using the class-based approach to the composable-based approach. So yeah, one of the other steps was to add tooling. So like Sandi called out, linting makes it so that your code base, I guess, it's more cohesive and it follows certain rules. It's also easier for your team, makes it easier for your team to adopt standards when adding in a new technology. So here's a snippet of just one of the linters that we added in, Compose specific linters to make it easier as we both learn to use Compose within the code or within our app and going forward. Another piece that we added was theming, like I called out before. And moving forward, so there is more still to come for us. So documentation, highlighting the best practices of how we use Compose in the code. So Google already gives us a list of best practices, and as well as like Linting has, I guess, resources on why you would get a warning or a certain error, but we want to have a way for it to be in one place instead of having to go to different resources to get that information. As well, another thing that we'll be doing moving forward is creating a book club for us to, as we learn together. So these are just some of the things that is helping our team and how we're moving forward with it. But although this is, I guess, kind of about Jetpack, similar about Jetpack Compose somewhat, these are things that could be attributed to other teams adding in a new technology. So having documentation is always good for people to go through. Having a team meeting, a set aside time for your team to get on the same page and get ideas together, instead of just like in Slack, having that dedicated time within your schedule. And also linting, I called that out before, would help you as you go forward. So, all right. And with that, are there any questions?
I have a question. So you said that you are documenting as you're going. When you're planning a sprint, do you try to accommodate or factor in documenting into your estimate?
Good question, Emily. That is currently not happening. Documentation is something that it should be to the forefront, and I think that would make it easier to have a JIRA ticket to capture the work. But right now, it's been just like as I'm working on something, adding it into a Notion file. So, but it would be good to have an actual ticket to capture that work. So.
Oh, I have a question about linting versus like best practices documents.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting that you can have Compose specific linting, but where do you think, like, what would be the difference between linting and best practices? I know you said you haven't really moved forward into the best practices yet, but do you have some ideas? Like, is best practices just more general things that you can't make your linter like find and apply? That makes sense.
That makes sense. So I guess
it's fair if you haven't, like, I know you said that was moving forward. So if you're still in the process of thinking that through, like,
yeah. No. So the linter will call out. So the first thing that comes to mind is like how state is used. The linter will call out if like you send through, and this is specific to Jetpack Compose, if you send through as a parameter a mutable state object instead of sending through or instead of sending through a mutable state as a parameter would allow the composable or the child composable to be able to manipulate state. Whereas part of the best practices is to like send down not this actual state object, but to send through like say a Boolean or a string, something that child cannot manipulate
Okay.
And the linter would call that out. And the best practices would, remind people to think of moving their state further up in the process instead of like having to go through, like you make the composable and having to go back and change things as you go along. So
okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Alex, I just wanted to say that everything I do is like a paradigm shift for companies. So it was really interesting to hear how at least one team incorporates that kind of discussion and structure. So thank you very much for sharing that.
yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome job.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Alex?